Welcome. This is Gary Salton, Chief of R&D and creator of IOP Technology. This video is focused on the why and how of information exchange. Part 2 will offer some tools to help improve communication outcomes. But for now, let's focus on the machinery. This slide shows what we are talking about: the transmission of thoughts, opinions, or information between human beings. The sketch is from Alexander Graham Bell's notebooks. The subject is not exactly a new one. So, how does it work? First, any message has to be evaluated for applicability. You don't want to pay attention to things that are of no concern to you. I call this standard of relevance your interests. If the message passes the relevance test, it has to be evaluated. This is the information processing phase, the box in the middle. Finally, there's some kind of outcome. This becomes the state of your interests for the next round of communications. Let's start at the beginning. Your interests determine what you pay attention to or what you ignore. They are the things that affect your well-being. You can look at them as motives for accepting a communication. Different people have different motives. For example, some of us are repelled by risk, others seek it. There's no single formula for everyone, and, as you can see, interests have a lot of potential aspects. Input is the first part of the evaluation phase. It determines how easily the receiver will be able to acquire the information that is being sent. For example, some of us prefer a fast-paced delivery. Others are attuned to a more measured pace. The same logic applies to the other factors listed. Get it wrong, and you've compromised your communication. Once we've received information and determined that it may be of interest, we have to figure out exactly what it means. This is the processing phase. Different people pay attention to different things. If you know these evaluation standards, you can anticipate them. This can help improve the odds that your communication will be successful. Once something has been received and evaluated, the next step is to figure out what to do with it. That's the output. The output includes both the content and the way it is being delivered. Different people favor different outputs. Some of us like to plan things. Others just do them. Some prefer tentative commitments. Others want to be definitive. Knowing the likely output of your targeted receiver can affect the what as well as the how of your message. Finally, the outcome is the result of a communication event, as it is understood by the receiver. We learn by experience. Your message is part of the receiver's experience. It can reset or reinforce interests as well as their assessment process. If you are going to have more than one dealing with a person, you would do well to pay attention to the quality of their outcomes. It will influence your future success. These factors, interest, the evaluation process, and outcomes, can operate in two ways. The first is what I call a communications channel approach. It may have a little feedback loop, but basically it is a one-way flow. In this form, a sender's posture in the communication is at least partially set by the receiver. The same is not true in reverse. The receiver's posture does not have to be affected by the message. The second way is a transaction channel approach. Here, both parties pay attention to each other. Each person's stance is at least partially set by the other's posture. Recognizing this difference has significant implications. First, let's look at the communication model. It is used in areas like advertising, ingratiation, instruction, and role-based communications. You know, telling the next department in the work sequence something. Do it and you're done. The receiver gets the message and does a spot evaluation for applicability. If there's an interest, things move to the process stage. If there is no interest, it's all done. You've got a do-nothing outcome. If the message makes the cut, it moves to the evaluation stage. If the evaluation is indeterminate, you've got another do-nothing output. For example, it's just not worth thinking about. If the evaluation is either positive or negative, you move to the output stage. Output options range from do nothing to definitive action. That action can be negative as well as positive. Now, let's look at the whole mechanism. Pause and consider. You had one input and three possible paths to an outcome. Two of the paths are not favorable. The third may be favorable. The very structure of the communications model sets up a hurdle for someone trying to get a message through. There are more ways to fail than there are to succeed. Now, the communication model has its place. It is fast, flexible, and cheap. It has a role in coordination if the receiver has an obligation to listen. If there is an obligation, the test of applicability is automatically met. The odds improve. I call this constrained coordination since it depends on the strengths of the obligations involved. In bureaucracies, these can be pretty strong. The communications channel model has its downsides. First, there is a probability of misunderstanding. You get one shot. And, of course, the output is uncertain. It may not be favorable. Further, there is a chance you won't even get an output at all. On balance, the communication channel model works best 1. In bureaucracies, 2. Where the stakes are not high, and 3. Where you are content with probabilities, such as in advertising to wide audiences. It has its place. The second way of applying IOPT is in what I call the transaction model. The general structure still works the same way, but now there are two processes going on simultaneously. This changes a lot of things. First, both parties are paying attention to each other. It's a real two-way flow. Complexity is increased dramatically. Secondly, we now have a process rather than an event. Everyone gets multiple opportunities to adjust their message. Things become a lot more dynamic. Third, the information flow is more controllable. The parties can work on any of the 5 elements. There are lots of buttons to push. Finally, the transaction model is more likely to come to a definitive conclusion. Something will probably happen. The transaction model has a bit of a split personality. We use the model when we engage in casual social exchange. Used in this way, it can be pleasurable. In this form, there's not much at stake. We usually choose safe subjects, like the weather. We don't have to worry about passing the relevance test. We can enjoy modestly expanding our horizons without much risk or cost. But the transaction model can also be used for purposeful gain. This involves trying to get something we want, whatever that might be. Now there is something at stake. That something is whatever you want. Mutual interests are no longer assured. Now you have to work to align those interests. If there is enough at stake, a raise, promotion, or a corner office, this can quickly become really stressful. Learning to manage transaction channels can positively affect your life, both in the long and short run. From an organizational standpoint, purposeful gain is the more important use of the transaction model. In this mode, the process is demanding. There are action and reaction sequences all over the place. Things can get complex fast, and its dynamic character can move things in unexpected ways. However, it is powerful. You can get the result and control, at least to a degree, what that result is going to be. Because it is an exchange process, misunderstandings are usually corrected on the spot. The parties involved are very likely to understand each other. They may not like it, but they will understand it. All of the characteristics combine to make the transaction model an ideal tool for coordination. Here, the payoff is high enough to warrant the cost in time, effort, and tension involved. So, why have you spent the last 8 minutes listening to this stuff? First, you have learned about a universal process. It cannot be avoided. It is built into every human who is able to function in a social environment. Secondly, we specified the components. Every one of them can be influenced by your choice of how and what to transmit. You now have a template you can apply in the real world. Finally, we have identified 2 basic modes within our universal process, the communication and transaction channels. Each has its place. Each carries both challenges and opportunities. Overall, not bad for less than 10 minutes of listening. You can go to part 2 of this series to learn about some specific communication tools. In any event, thank you for your interest in IOP technology. You can learn more about IOP by visiting our websites at www.iop.com or www.oeinstitute.org. Thank you again.